It was late afternoon in Atlanta, and the golden rays of the sun streaked through the buildings, casting long shadows on the busy streets. Special Agent Kendra Lawson of the FBI was finally heading back to her office after a grueling day in the field. The weight of her badge and duty had never felt heavier, but as she drove along the highway, there was a fleeting moment of peace. That moment was shattered when flashing blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. With a weary sigh, Kendra pulled her car over, assuming it was just another routine traffic stop. But nothing about this stop was routine. Officer Damon Harlow, tall, broad, and exuding an aura of unearned authority, stepped out of the patrol car. His cold gaze bore into Kendra before he even reached her window. His mind had already made a judgment, and she could see it in his eyes. As she rolled down her window, Kendra greeted him with calm professionalism. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone even, giving him the benefit of the doubt. But Harlow didn't answer. His voice was curt, almost mechanical. "License and registration." Kendra stayed composed. She reached into the side pocket and pulled out her FBI badge, placing it deliberately on her lap for him to see. "I'm Special Agent Kendra Lawson, FBI. I'm on official duty. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Harlow spared her badge a disinterested glance, then repeated his order in a tone that suggested she was wasting his time. "License and registration. Don't make this difficult." She felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't protocol. Still, she didn't want to escalate the situation unnecessarily. With slow, deliberate movements, she retrieved her license and registration from the glove compartment and handed them over. Harlow examined them briefly, then barked another order. "Step out of the vehicle." Kendra's calm cracked for a moment. "Excuse me, officer. I've complied with everything you've asked. May I know why?" "I don't need a reason," Harlow interrupted, leaning in closer. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Step out. Now." Pedestrians nearby had begun to take notice. Some paused, watching the exchange with growing concern. A few even raised their phones, recording the scene. Kendra knew how dangerous this could get. She raised her hands in plain view and slowly opened the door, stepping out as instructed. But as soon as her feet touched the ground, Harlow twisted her arm behind her back and slapped cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. "Your badge means nothing here," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. There were murmurs of disbelief, followed by outrage. "She's FBI. This is wrong," one bystander shouted. Kendra stayed silent. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She let her calm stare rest on Harlow as he shoved her into the back seat of his patrol car. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that this wasn't the end for her. It was the beginning. As the cruiser drove through the city streets, Kendra's mind raced. She thought about Julian Cross, a high-ranking commander in the Atlanta Police Department. Once a hero, Cross had become the protector of something far more sinister. Years ago, Cross had been a young, idealistic cop determined to clean up the streets. But when his family faced financial ruin and politicians demanded loyalty over justice, he made compromises. At first, they were small, turning a blind eye to misconduct here, taking favors there. Over time, greed and power consumed him, and he became a key player in a network of corruption that ran deep through the department. At the top of that network was Deputy Chief Malcolm Graves. Graves was as cunning as he was ruthless. Once a man of principle, he had tried to expose corruption in his early years on the force. Instead of being protected, he was punished, demoted, and isolated until the system broke him. But Graves didn't stay broken. He adapted. If justice was a sham, then he would control it for his own ends. And he did. Graves built an empire in the shadows, manipulating officers, politicians, and criminals alike. Cross was his enforcer. Officers like Harlow were his foot soldiers. Kendra had suspected as much before. Now she was sure. Harlow wasn't just abusing his power on a whim. He was protecting something much bigger. And they had just made a dangerous mistake. They'd targeted the wrong woman. Back at the FBI field office, Kendra found the one person she could trust, Special Agent Rafael Vega. Vega was a rock-solid investigator, a former paramedic who had witnessed firsthand the devastating failures of corrupt systems. Years ago, he'd lost a family during a house fire he couldn't stop. Since then, he had vowed to fight injustice wherever he found it. Together, they began piecing together a case that would rock the city to its core. "We have to be careful," Vega warned during one of their clandestine meetings. "If Graves knows we're digging, he'll come for us hard." "I'm counting on it," Kendra replied. "He'll make a mistake. And when he does, we'll be ready." They worked late into the night, reviewing years of case files tied to Cross and Harlow. They found the same patterns repeating: evidence mysteriously lost, witnesses disappearing, cases dropped without explanation. But one case stood out: a drug trafficking investigation tied to a cartel that should have ended in mass arrests. Instead, it collapsed after a key piece of evidence vanished. Cross had been in charge. "This isn't incompetence," Kendra said. "It's deliberate." As they closed in on the truth, the threats came. One night, Kendra received a text: "We know where your father lives." She didn't hesitate. She moved him into protective custody and ordered FBI surveillance on his home. But the next morning, someone spray-painted "Stop" or "Else" in blood-red letters across his front door. "This is Graves," Vegas said. "He's escalating." "Then we escalate too," Kendra answered. They found an unlikely ally in Naomi Park, a data analyst who, under pressure from Graves, had leaked information about their movements. Naomi confessed everything in tears, telling them how Graves had manipulated her with promises of helping her sick sister. Kendra couldn't excuse her betrayal, but she saw an opportunity. "If you want to make this right, help us bring him down," Kendra told her. Naomi provided them with access to encrypted files that laid bare the rotten core of Graves' empire. Shell companies, bribery, human trafficking. They had it all. But to crack the files, they needed help. That's when Naomi introduced them to Echo, an underground hacker who lived off the grid. Echo worked fast, slicing through layers of security no one else could touch. When the files opened, the truth was worse than they had imagined. Malcolm Graves wasn't just protecting bad cops. He was working hand-in-hand with cartels, arms dealers, and corrupt politicians. His influence stretched beyond the city, infecting the highest levels of power. Kendra made one final call. "This ends now." A task force was formed. SWAT teams, FBI agents, and internal affairs operatives converged on Graves' estate. The raid was swift and brutal. Graves tried to run, but was caught by Kendra herself. "It's over," she told him as she cuffed him. "Grabes es mir kid. You think this ends with me?" "In your case," Kendra said coldly, "it ended with a life sentence." And it did. Graves was convicted on multiple counts: racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, trafficking. Julian Cross followed him into prison. Damon Harlow was stripped of his badge and charged with assault and abuse of power. The trials rocked the nation. Public protests demanded reforms. Oversight committees were formed. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. But Kendra knew it wasn't over. One day, an envelope arrived on her desk. Inside was a single photograph: Graves' remaining associates. Scrawled across it were the words, "We're still here." Kendra smiled faintly. She looked up at Vega and said, "Then so are we." Epilogue. Kendra Lawson became a national figure, an emblem of resistance against systemic corruption. She spoke at conferences, not for fame, but for the people who had no voice. "Justice," she told a crowded room in Washington, D.C., "is not a gift. It's a fight, and every one of us has to be ready to fight for it." The battle wasn't over, but Kendra was ready for the next war. What do you think? If you were in Kendra's position, would you keep fighting? Share your thoughts below, and if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.